Okay, so today we're diving into something that I think is super relevant to a lot of folks out there, especially here in California. We're talking about tenant rights.
Yeah, really important stuff, especially with the current housing climate.
Right. It can feel overwhelming trying to figure out what your rights actually are when it comes to renting. So we've got this briefing document here and a bunch of frequently asked questions, and we're going to try to make sense of it all.
Basically, we want to give everyone listening the tools they need to feel confident and protected in their homes.
Exactly, especially if things get difficult with a landlord.
For sure. Like, disputes happen, and it's so important to know where you stand legally.
Definitely. So I guess the first thing to acknowledge is that there's often a real power imbalance, right, between landlords and tenants.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for a lot of people, renting is, well, it's the only option. And the idea of losing your home, it's just terrifying.
Right. It's just your whole foundation.
Yeah, exactly. So knowing your rights, it's not just about, being informed. It can actually be the key to balancing that power dynamic a little bit.
So let's talk about some of the biggest legal issues that California tenants run into. What would you say is at the top of the list?
Well, wrongful eviction is a huge one. It's basically when a landlord tries to get you out without a valid reason, legally speaking, or sometimes they try to do it the right way, but they mess up the process, like the notice they have to give you.
So you suddenly get told you have to leave and maybe you don't even know why.
Right, or you have almost no time to find a new place. And what's interesting is that a lot of those wrongful evictions, they happen because landlords aren't totally clear on the specifics of the law, like the exact way they have to give notice and stuff.
Oh, so those technicalities really do matter.
Oh, they can make or break a case, absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so besides that, what other problems come up a lot?
Uninhabitable living conditions, unfortunately, are pretty common. We're talking about situations where it's actually dangerous or really unhealthy to live in the place.
Like what kinds of things?
Mold that just won't go away, leaks, no heating or hot water, things like that. Basic stuff that the landlord just won't fix even after you've asked them to.
And in California, isn't there a legal requirement for landlords to provide a decent place to live?
Exactly. It's called the warranty of habitability. It means the landlord has to make sure the place is safe and livable. So when you have these kinds of problems, it's a direct violation of that warranty.
So I guess a good way to think about it is if something in your rental is actually making you sick, or it's unsafe, or it's stopping you from using your home normally, then it's probably an uninhabitable condition.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb.
What else should renters be aware of?
Okay, so there are security deposit disputes, which can be a real headache when you move out. Then there's landlord harassment, which can take different forms like unwanted entry into your apartment or threats or just trying to intimidate you.
Yikes, that's scary.
And you have the right to privacy and peaceful enjoyment of your home.
Which, that seems basic, but I guess some landlords don't respect that.
Sadly, yeah. And there's retaliation too. That's when a landlord tries to punish you for, say, asking for repairs or something like that.
So they basically try to make your life harder because you stood up for yourself.
Exactly. Discrimination based on things like race or gender or family status is a big no-no, of course. And illegal rent increases are a problem, especially in places with rent control.
Okay, so it sounds like there are a lot of potential legal landmines out there for renters.
There are, yeah.
And that's where, having an expert on your side could really make a difference. So can you talk about how a tenant rights attorney could actually help someone in these situations?
Oh, for sure. Let's take eviction as an example. A lawyer can look at the notice you got and tell you right away if it's even legal. They know your rights and what defenses you might have, and they can represent you in court.
So they're like your legal bodyguard, basically.
In a way, yeah. And they can often spot mistakes that the landlord or their lawyer might have made, which, believe it or not, can sometimes get the whole case thrown out.
Really? Just like that?
Sometimes, yeah. Landlord-tenant law is very specific.
So it's like they know the rules of the game and they can use them to your advantage.
Exactly.
What about those uninhabitable conditions we were talking about? What can an attorney do there?
Well, they can walk you through your options. Sometimes it might involve withholding rent, but that's something you have to do very carefully.
Oh, right. You don't want to just stop paying rent without knowing the rules.
No, you have to follow a specific process, give the landlord the right kind of notice in writing, all of that. A lawyer can help you do it the right way.
So you're protected.
Exactly. There's also repair and deduct, where you pay for the repairs yourself and take it out of your rent.
Oh, interesting.
And in really bad situations, there's constructive eviction, where the place is so bad that you basically have to move out, but you might not have to pay the rest of your lease.
Wow. So it's like the landlord has made it impossible to live there.
Right. But again, you need a lawyer to make sure you're doing everything by the book so you don't accidentally violate your lease or something.
Makes sense. And what about when a landlord is being really harassing?
An attorney can be a powerful advocate in those situations. They can lay out your rights, like your right to privacy and peaceful enjoyment, and they can send the landlord a cease and desist letter.
Oh, so it gets official.
Yep. And if the harassment doesn't stop, they can go to court and get a restraining order or even sue the landlord.
Wow. So they can really put a stop to it.
That's the goal.
So I imagine tenant rights attorneys also just have a deeper understanding of how all this stuff works, especially in California.
Oh, absolutely. California tenant law is really complex. I mean, there are things like just cause eviction and rent control in a lot of cities, and those laws have a lot of nuances. Lawyers have the knowledge to make sense of it all and explain it to you in a way that you can understand.
Right, because that quote we saw about knowledge being power, that really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's so true. When you know your rights, you go from feeling helpless to feeling like you can actually do something.
Exactly. It's empowering.
And attorneys can also level the playing field, because sometimes you'll get landlords who think they know more than you, or they take advantage of the fact that a lot of tenants don't know their rights.
Right. They figure they can get away with stuff.
And sometimes they can, if the tenant doesn't know any better. But an attorney can call them out on it and make sure things are done fairly.
So they're kind of like your secret weapon.
You could say that. It's really about fighting for fair housing practices and making sure tenants have access to justice.
So let's talk about uninhabitable conditions a bit more. What does that actually mean in California, legally speaking?
Okay, so legally, an uninhabitable unit is one that doesn't have basic necessities, or it has conditions that are dangerous for the people living there.
Okay, so not just like a little bit inconvenient, but actually dangerous.
Right, it has to be serious. Things like not having proper heat, windows that don't keep out the weather, broken plumbing, and stuff like that.
So like if your apartment is basically falling apart and the landlord won't fix it.
Exactly. Or if there's like a ton of mold growing everywhere. Those are all things that would make a place uninhabitable.
And we talked about withholding rent, but just to emphasize, it sounds like you really need a lawyer to help you with that.
Oh, absolutely. You can't just decide not to pay rent because you're unhappy about something. You have to follow the legal process very carefully.
Right, and a lawyer can make sure you do it right.
Exactly.
Okay, and landlord harassment. We talked about threats and stuff, but it can be more than that, right?
Yeah, it can be anything that interferes with your right to live in your home peacefully.
So like what kinds of things?
Constant unwanted entry, trying to intimidate you, interfering with your utilities, things like that.
Okay, it's about making you feel uncomfortable and unsafe in your own home.
Right, and that's against the law.
And a lawyer can help you put a stop to it.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say someone is having problems with their landlord here in California. What are the first things they should do?
First things first, educate yourself on your rights. Don't just rely on what you hear from other people, get the facts.
Right, because there are so many myths out there.
Exactly. Then gather all your documentation, your lease, any notices from your landlord, any evidence you have of the problem, like photos or videos.
So basically get organized.
Yep. And then talk to a professional. Contact a tenant rights organization, or even better, a lawyer. Most attorneys offer a free consultation, so you can talk to them about your situation and see what your options are.
Without having to pay anything up front.
Right. And don't wait too long to take action.
Because things can escalate quickly.
They can.
Okay, and something else that stood out to me in our materials was this idea that the legal process is like a game, and that some landlords can be kind of arrogant and make mistakes. What's that about?
It's really about empowering tenants, because sometimes the legal system can feel really intimidating, right? But it's really just a set of rules that everyone has to follow.
Including landlords.
Yes, and some landlords, they think they have all the power and they don't always pay attention to the details.
So they slip up.
Exactly. And when you know your rights, you can actually use those mistakes to your advantage.
It's like turning the tables.
You could say that. Because the law is often on the side of the tenant, but you have to know how to use it.
That's really interesting.
Landlord-tenant law can be pretty technical, and a good lawyer can spot those landlord mistakes a mile away.
So it's really worth getting that legal advice.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to wrap things up, What are the key takeaways you want California renters to remember from all of this?
Well, the biggest thing is that you have rights. You have strong protections against things like wrongful eviction, uninhabitable conditions, and harassment.
Right. So you're not powerless.
Not at all. And the best way to protect yourself is to know your rights.
And if things get complicated, get help from a tenant rights attorney.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to reach out for legal advice. A good attorney can help you navigate the system and make sure you're treated fairly.
Great advice. And on that note, let's leave our listeners with this thought. If you got an eviction notice tomorrow, or if your apartment suddenly became unlivable, would you know what to do?
That's a good question for everyone to ask themselves.
Because being prepared can make all the difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's it for today. See you next time.
See you later.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.